G'day everyone and welcome again to the chat. The Bloodstock sales season is in full swing, and this week coming up, we've got the Inglis Melbourne Premier Yearling sale. And joining me today is the Victorian Bloodstock manager. He's also an auctioneer in Simon Vivian. Good morning, Simon. How are you, mate?
Good morning, Ben. I'm very well and looking forward to the sale.
Obviously a very exciting one, but also a very sad one because it'll be your last one before you retire after a long time in the industry. How many years is that all up?
Ben, I've been in the thoroughbred industry, in the agency industry for 44 years now. So it has been a pretty long innings. And you're quite right. This will be my final premiere. It won't be my final sale. I'll still go to Sydney and do the Easter yearling sale in Sydney in April. But this will be my final one at Melbourne, which will be 16 years of being with Inglis, which has been a wonderful 16 years.
I've got the catalogue here. I've been having a bit of a look. There's a lot of first season size in there, but more importantly, what are you most looking forward to with the 804 lots catalogue for this week's sale?
Ben, I think when, as a sales agency, for me, probably the most important thing that I can satisfy myself with at the conclusion of a sale is to have a very, very high clearance rate. If you've got a clearance rate of 90% or thereabouts, what you've been able to do is you've been able to bring your vendors and your purchasers together. If it's slanted too much in one side, if the vendors are wanting too much money and the buyers aren't prepared to pay, you've got a poor clearance rate. That's disappointing. And then if the buyers are walking away saying, gee, we stole horses, then that's not good either. So the reality is that we want to be able to create a very fair marketplace, and the best judgment of a fair marketplace is to have that very high clearance rate. So I think that's probably my number one priority. But then, of course, subsequent to that, we love seeing good results. We love seeing horses make good money in the sales ring, Ben, and ultimately to go on and see them perform on the racetrack. Whether we get another Black Caviar, another Ole Kirk, another September Run, you just look forward to getting those really high quality racehorses on the track.
And since you started in Bloodstock back in 1977, what have been some of the significant changes you've noticed across the sales and also just the industry in general?
Well, I think probably the most significant change has been, well, it's probably two. One links to the other. The first thing is the use of computers, where when I started, we used to sit down with the Australian stud books and the turf registers, and we would sit down and we would actually handwrite all of the pedigrees. And it was almost like doing an apprenticeship. If you can imagine being an apprentice plumber and an apprentice electrician, you start with the rather menial jobs, but they become very important. They become a great foundation. Over the last 44 years, we've gone to a situation where the pedigrees are now basically coming straight off of a computer. If you said to me that you wanted to have a look at a pedigree of a certain horse now, I could pull it up on a computer and email it to you, and we could be talking about it in 30 seconds' time. So the actual skill of doing pedigrees that long-handed way has been lost, and I suppose to a degree it's meant that it's harder for young people to actually get actively involved in the business, because that was just the great apprenticeship that we had to do. The other part, of course, that's happened is, which is again a further step on from the computer aspect, has been the advent of these online sales, and they've been quite remarkable. I think Inglis, it's safe to say, was one of the absolute forerunners, much to the delight of our CEO and managing director in Mark Webster, who was the foundation behind all of that with Inglis. He created a fantastic platform with our IT boys, and I think now it's admired around the world as probably one of the best online auction sites that you would ever find for bloodstock. So, those two things have been two massively significant changes in our thoroughbred industry when it comes to sales.
So you say you used to do them all by hand. It obviously sounds like back in those days it was definitely an art form too, wasn't it?
An
art form in terms of writing them by hand.
Yes, it was. Look, it was quite an interesting process because we still were working with the same size catalogue. So when you would handwrite a pedigree, you had to try and assess how many lines it would actually be. So what would occur in those circumstances, Ben, is we would handwrite the pedigree, it would then be sent off in a handwritten form to a printer. The printer would then typeset it and then send us back a proof. And from the proof, we would sit there and edit the catalogue page. We would drop out things that were no longer significant. We would drop off to have to shorten the page and things like that. So it really was quite skillful. We would sit down. There would probably at times be 8 or 10 people writing pedigrees, and you might write maybe 4 or 5 pedigrees in a whole day. So you can see with a catalogue like 804 horses for Melbourne Premier, we had 803 in the classic sale. So 1,600 horses would take, the pedigrees would take a long, long time. So it's a pretty interesting exercise for sure.
Just back on those first season sires we've got going for the ring this season, which one has you excited? I'm very excited by Impending. That's my favourite one that I've seen so far.
Look, I think we all get incredibly excited by the Impendings and the Highland Reels and the Almanzors. They are they are a fantastic batch. I mean, we've got over 20 individual first season sires, Ben, and with each new year of first season sires, we look forward and hope that there's going to be a really high quality vintage crop. If we look at the existing size of the first season size of 2-year-olds, which is the draft of Capitalist, Extreme Choice, Flying Artie, Shalar, etc., it would appear at the moment to be an outstanding draft. That looks like a really high quality bunch of first season size, which is terrific for the industry. And now when we have this new draft of horses coming through, I think it's so exciting. I'm with you very much on Impending. I think he's a great looking horse. He's a magnificent walker, and all of his progeny are great walking horses as well. But the other horse that I've been so taken with, because I've seen a number of them, is a first season sire based here at Swettenham Stud in Victoria by the name of Highland Reel. He was a phenomenal racehorse, but he's leaving a really good quality product on the ground. And whilst perhaps they're not going to be really precocious 2-year-olds, I think that back in 2-year-olds and into their 3-year-old days, we're going to see some pretty exciting times with the Highland Reels as well. So they're probably two that really excite me, and as much probably because they're both based here in Victoria.
And I don't think we saw the best of Highland Reel when it came to Australia and racing the Cox Plate, for example. But hopefully, with the progeny and they're staying in Australia, we will see some hopefully some success.
Ben, I think that's a very fair call. When you have a look at his record, he was sort of, well, some people would look at him and say he was basically a stayer, but I think that he had more speed than that, and it would be interesting to have been able to turn the clock back and have a horse like Highland Reel race in Australia, where I think he had the capacity to probably be a CF4 stakes or a Doncaster type horse, a 7 furlongs or 1,400 metres, a 1,600 metres sort of horse. So whilst he was able to stretch out, he was a very, very tough, genuine, fair income racehorse, and I think that we are very, very blessed to have him standing here in Victoria.
Tell me a little bit about David Coles, who you worked under when you first started. He's a legend of the thoroughbred auction industry.
Look, Mr. Coles was a phenomenal person. He taught us so many things. Not only did he teach us about the way of writing pedigrees, but he actually taught us one of the great lessons in life, and that was work ethic. There was one of the great things with David Coles was that he would never ask any member of his staff to do something that he wouldn't do himself. And I can still very much recall one day that we were actually selling at the Melbourne Showgrounds back when Coles Brothers sold at the Melbourne Showgrounds as well as in Adelaide at Wayville. And somebody made a joke to Mr. Coles about there being some droppings in his horse box. Mr. Coles charged straight over and picked up a rake, and the person was absolutely amazed but embarrassed by the fact that he'd almost intimidated Mr. Coles to go and muck out a box. But that was the sort of man that he was. He was a great leader. He taught us so much about work ethic. We would have to work, when I mentioned those pedigrees, if we had a time frame to get them done, it wasn't a 9 to 5 job. It was an 8 till 10, 8 in the morning till 10 at night. And he would leave and go away to meetings, and all of a sudden we'd see his car headlights coming back around the corner at 8:30 or 9 o'clock at night. He would sit down and do race form for us, or write out the pedigree cards, and then start to raconteur about certain stories. So he was a legend in that way. And of course, he was probably at the time, I would say, the finest bloodstock auctioneer in Australia, and certainly one of the finest bloodstock auctioneers in the world. And he was the man who gave me the opportunity to get up on the rostrum many, many, many years ago now, when I was invited to have a go at auctioneering. And he said to me, "I think you might be okay because you've got a voice like a foghorn." So I was lucky enough to get a crack at auctioneering, and it's been one of the great joys for me in the thoroughbred industry, is being able to stand up and do some adding up like that.
And you talk about opportunities. You've got you can almost say able assistant, but he will be taking over from you when you move on, when you call it a day in James Price. He's a familiar face to everyone in Inglis.
It's great to have James back. Of course, he was some years ago, Inglis initiated an internship, and James was our very first successful candidate. And whilst the internship was only meant to be a 12-month internship, and just to learn a little bit about the thoroughbred industry, I think everybody in Inglis was so impressed by James that he was offered a full-time position, which he accepted in our Sydney office. And then ultimately he came down and joined me here in Victoria as my 2IC, and was a great right-hand man and a great supporter. He was given an opportunity at the conclusion of a Melbourne Premier yearling sale a couple of years ago to join Woodside Park and Mark Rosethorn, and he's done a great job there, overseeing the state career of horses like Written Tycoon and Cable Bay and Rich Enough and these sorts of horses, Toast and Stardom. But then with my decision to hang up the gavel, it's been an opportunity for Inglis to approach James and ask whether he would like to return. And I'm very, very fortunate that someone like James will be able to transition into the seat that I'm currently in, knowing that a man who already knows and understands the thoroughbred industry, understands the Victorian marketplace, the Victorian clients, understands the staff that are already here at Oaklands. I think it's going to make life very simple for me. James will be with me for about 1 month before I hang up the boots, and it'll be a great transition. And I'm looking forward to working that month with James and handing over to him, but also to be able to see him progress and develop as a manager of the Victorian operation.
Are there any particular memorable lots that you've auctioned over all those 44 years that went on to become champions, and you look back and you're like, wow, I remember seeing it go through the ring and it just really caught my eye?
Look, I'll be honest, I don't do a lot of going back over catalogues. I know that when a horse like Ole Kirk steps out and performs as he has done with great distinction in Group 1 races, you go back and have a look at your notes, and I was very pleased to be able to see that I actually auctioned him, but that's not something that really sticks in your mind when you're going back and looking. The one that obviously probably was the horse that was probably important for me was many, many years ago in the year 2000. I was doing some auctioneering work for New Zealand Bloodstock, and I was fortunate enough just to be on the rostrum at the time when Don Eduardo went through the ring, and he obviously made $3.6 million, which nowadays, not that sum is not overly commonplace, but back then to have a horse make $1 million was extraordinary. So for him to make $3.6 million was something that was probably quite life-changing. He was in the ring for some 7 minutes, and I don't know how many 45 individual bids or something like that somebody once counted. But he was important because at that stage, there'd been a number of very expensive yearlings that perhaps hadn't been quite as successful on the racetrack. So he went into the Freedman camp, and the Freedman brothers trained him to win an Australian Derby. So I think I was probably really delighted to see him win a Group 1 race. It was important for a valuable colt like him to win that Group 1 race and then ultimately go to stud. So he does stick in my mind. I can remember looking at, for example, Black Caviar. I remember seeing her as a foal up at Gilgai and working with her right through with the team up at Gilgai at that stage. And I remember seeing her here at Oaklands Junction. But, of course, when she goes through the ring and Peter Moody buys her, no one has any idea that she's going to be end up being what she ultimately developed into. So as much as I'd love to be able to sit back and say that I clearly recall her going through the ring, Peter Hegney was the auctioneer at the time. I was standing behind Peter at that time. And, it's a massive buzz to be able to go back afterwards and sit back and say, look, we had the pleasure of being able to sell these champion racehorses.
Your enthusiasm for Melbourne Premier and the Victorian Breeding Industry Week really comes out whenever you speak. Where does that come from?
Look, it probably comes back a little bit to that discussion we had about David Coles, where it's a bit like you put your heart and soul into this. I mean, I'm South Australian. I grew up in South Australia, but I was very blessed to be able to come and move into Victoria in the late 1990s and work with a group of people that I've become quite frankly, very, very close friends with. I think that you can certainly treat the Victorian breeding community as clients, but I would honestly have to say that they are friends. They're a wonderful group of people. I have great pleasure in mixing with them socially. Whenever we get a chance to do inspections on farms, we try and incorporate into that lunches and dinners where we can all sit around and chew the fat and solve the problems of the world. And I think probably as much as anything else, this industry, Ben, it's a people industry. We have one common denominator being the thoroughbred horse, but it's very much a people industry. And I think for me, the people that I've been blessed to meet and the people that I've become blessed to be friends with has probably been one of it. And the fact that I'm living here in Victoria, I unashamedly sit back and couldn't wish anybody any better than I can here. I love seeing it when a Victorian vendor has some real success.
And you talk about Victoria, but you've worked all over Australia. Where has been the most enjoyable or interesting place to work, and why?
I think every one of them has been interesting. Obviously, I enjoyed my time in South Australia, and I was there for a long, long time. I had a great stint over in WA where I managed Goodwood Bloodstock. I spent some time up in Queensland managing the bloodstock interests of QBBS. Clearly under my reign with Inglis, I spent a lot of time in Sydney. But I'd have to say that unquestionably my favourite, my most enjoyable has been with Inglis and here in Victoria. I've loved every single minute of that part of it, Ben.
Are there any trends you're noticing across the market And has COVID been an influencing factor at all, do you feel?
Look, COVID has made us become more adaptable. I think that we'd all gone down a certain path. We all knew that what the program was going to be when it came to, you conclude your yearling sales series in April or May, those sort of date times. Then from the 1st of July, you're out on farms doing yearling inspections. You would go through the process of inspecting yearlings, selecting a catalogue to right through to Christmas time. Catalogues come out, and then from the 1st of January, you're into the sales series. This last 12 months has taught us that we have to be far more adaptable. We've had to be careful and clever about how we got around and did the inspections to select the catalogues. We've had to go through the processes of a sale such as Easter being a virtual auction, which was a real challenge for everybody. So I've had to adapt to that. We've had to have our buyers and our vendors adapt to it. So that's been quite a challenge, but I think it showed that how resilient this industry is with the market being as strong as it is. Even as we sit here now, we've still got COVID restrictions. We've got a yearling sale coming up this weekend, and we've got signs up everywhere. We've got we're obviously encouraging distancing. We've got masks on when it comes to the auditorium, which is a very important part of the Melbourne sales ring, the Oakland's auditorium. We've got limitations as to how many people we can have in the auditorium and how we're going about that process of keeping them distanced. So there's been all of those challenges, but I think what it has proven to everybody is that in absolute adversity that's come down with COVID, the thoroughbred industry has been able to be incredibly resilient from our racing right through to our breeding and to our sales. I think it's testimony to the application of every member of the thoroughbred industry in Australia that's been as successful as it has been.
I was up at the Magic Millions at the Gold Coast in January, for example, and even though COVID's been a different situation up there in Queensland, it does show, you're right, the resilience. And it definitely, if people all band together and work together, things can happen.
Indeed. Look, we certainly had a massive sale, a phenomenal sale with Classic Sale in Sydney. And again, we were all having to be very, very cautious and careful about the way that we go about it. But again, what everybody has become so obvious with is their respect for other people. We know that the broader community has been quite blessed in Australia that we haven't had the spread of the virus as other countries have. But that's probably as much because we've been as vigilant as we have been with distancing. And look, Classic was terrific. Certainly the Gold Coast was terrific. New Zealand had to go through a very tough time with their sales because the Australian market was unable to participate in attendance, but participated online, and they had a good sale. Subsequent sales right around the land have been very good. So I think it's been quite incredible, the attitude of the people.
Like the people make the horse racing industry. So do you feel like that's the thing you'll miss most about working in Inglis and more specifically in the wider racing and bloodstock industry?
I think I'm going to miss the people. Look, I suppose I don't intend to go home and grow tomatoes. I've said that a few times, but I don't intend to go home and grow tomatoes for the rest of my life. I just want to be able to take more time to spend with my wife and my kids, my grandchildren, which will be a lot of fun. And to just, whilst we can't travel internationally at this stage, I would love to be able to travel more around Australia and have a little bit more of a look around there with my wife, which would be great. But at the same time, I don't intend to walk away from the industry. I would like to think that I've got some great friends and great clients that I could try and assist in some way. I suppose over 44 years, you do pick up a bit of knowledge. I do recall having a conversation, if I can turn the clock back again 40 odd years. I remember somebody asking Colin Hayes, the late great Colin Hayes as a trainer, how much he thought he knew about the thoroughbred industry. And he said, I've been doing this for nearly 60 years now. And he said, I think I'm probably up to about 5%. So what it is that it takes a long time to learn this business. There's always something new to learn. So I want to keep learning as much as I possibly can and hopefully be able to share some of my experiences and some of my knowledge with younger people that are coming into the industry. So I'll be working with the people as much as I possibly can, Ben.
Just back on the Premier sale, is there any particular lot or particular studs draft that you've seen and you're like, wow, I'm really excited to see this go through the ring?
Look, I do think that there are, well, I think first we all get our favourites, and I've got a couple of favourite horses that I've seen so far, but there's still some of the lots that have come in from South Australia and from New South Wales that I've not yet had the privilege of looking at because we didn't do those inspections. They were done by our interstate staff. So I'm looking forward to seeing all of those. The drafts that have come down. Look, some of the farms, farms like Maluka and Blue Gum, Springmount that sell exclusively in Melbourne. I think I really appreciate their terrific attention to the Melbourne Premier Sale. But then we've got just about every major breeder in Australia, quite frankly, and now we've got farms like Waikato and Cambridge and a number of other great clients from New Zealand supporting the sale. So look, I don't think there's probably any individual drafts that I could happily sort of identify as being stars. I just think that this is a really good batch of horses. I think that down the track, we will be able to look back on the 2021 version of Melbourne Premier and identify horses that are graduates that are really high quality racehorses. And look, it's again, I think that the 90% clearance rate will be very important to me, or close to 90% clearance rate. But I've no doubt that, and I will look forward to chasing down, is seeing the success of these horses from their 2-year-old days in September, October, November of 2021, right through to their older careers in 2022, 2023, etc. So there'll be some really good racehorses come out.
Just lastly, Simon, away from Bloodstock Consulting and Auctioneering, what does life look like for Simon Vivian?
Life, look, I love my footy, so I'm a very avid Adelaide Crows fan, so I love my football, I love my cricket. I certainly, as I said before, I'd like to do a lot of travelling around Australia, and probably as much of that by car, because I think you get a great way of looking at things. I just want to be able to breathe some fresh air, Ben, enjoy life, get to some of the sports that I haven't been able to get to for a while. As I said, the football, the cricket, get back to the races and be able to walk around and just be able to chat to people and things like that. So look, I think it's God willing that there's continued good health, and myself, my wife and my family are able to enjoy it. And I'm very much looking forward to just having a bit more time to spend with all of them.
Thanks very much for joining me today, Simon, giving me an insight into your career, the upcoming Melbourne Premier Sale, and what you're looking forward to in retirement. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Ben. Really appreciate your interest. Thank you, man.
Thank you.